The moment I was reborn to save the unconscious and defeated Ethan Shaw, I made a decisive choice. I ran. Life and death are up to fate. Wealth and honor rest in the hands of heaven. In this life, bridges return to bridges, roads return to roads, we each go our own way. I ran home and threw myself into my mother's arms as she was cooking, my nose stinging with the rush of emotion. In my previous life, my parents were too proud to embarrass me. After I left for the capital with Ethan, they only came to visit twice. The first time, they wore brand new clothes they had specially bought in town, bringing with them a wild pheasant they hunted, some black wolfberries they picked, dried mushrooms they'd gathered, and some fruits and melons from the countryside. They traveled all that way to attend my wedding with Ethan. The Shaw family only saw them as a disgrace. I'll never forget how my parents stood awkwardly at the door, trying to curry favor. Yet, for my sake, they lowered their heads again and again, saying, "Lena is a good girl. You're a respectable family. We trust you'll treat her well." When they left, my parents held me tightly and cried, "Sweetheart, now that you're married, don't worry about us anymore. Just live your life well." I knew then they were afraid Ethan's family would look down on me for marrying above my station. The second time, my aging father brought my sickly mother to the capital just to see me one last time. I still don't know how he carried my nearly immobile mother all the way just to watch me from afar. All I remember is turning around one morning at the end of a narrow alley and suddenly feeling like something had been ripped from my chest. Later, I received the terrible news. They were both gone. After returning home, neighbors told me my mother had developed a tumor, and in just 6 months, they had spent every cent of their savings. The train fare had been scraped together by our kind neighbors. Shortly after they came back, my mother passed away. After settling everything, my father left behind a small sum from selling their old house for me. They had me late in life, and I never gave them a moment of peace or joy. I was stuck in the Shaw household, mocked by anyone who pleased. I served Ethan's parents, raised our son, and took care of my husband. The only thing anyone ever praised me for was being hardworking and capable. Yet not one bit of that effort was for someone who truly cared for me. Even in the end, the only hint of regret was when my son said, "It's such a pity Mom died too early. She didn't live to see her granddaughter." Pity? What he really meant was that he lost someone who tirelessly looked after his kid. The Shaw family, each and every one of them, held themselves above others. I spent half my life entangled with them, and they spent that same time despising me, yet relied on me all the while. Clearly, this was my misfortune. Perhaps the heavens heard my bitterness and gave me another chance at life. This time, it's only for my parents. My mom, now mildly annoyed at how clingy I was, told me to go knead the dough. I didn't say a word and got right to it. She teased that I must have been possessed, since I used to whine, act spoiled, and always find ways to avoid chores. When I heard my dad had returned, I dashed out of the kitchen like a shot. But the moment I saw who he was pushing in a cart, my face went pale. The person lying on the hay was none other than Ethan Shaw. Unconscious. I clenched my teeth so hard they nearly cracked. If I had known, I would have pushed him into the river and let him drown. "Sweetheart, come give your dad a hand," my father called out. Chased a rabbit down the mountain and ended up picking up a man instead. Dad had already applied herbal medicine to his wounds to stop the bleeding. Ethan had been running for his life, pursued by someone trying to kill him, and had fled into our area. He'd been stabbed twice, once in the shoulder and once in the back. The original bandages had torn during his escape, making the wounds look worse than they were. Luckily, there was no fatal injury. With fresh bandages, water, and food, he'd recover. But I couldn't let Dad find that out just yet. I pretended to help support Ethan and slipped a badge from his inner pocket. "Oh wow, Dad, look at this. Doesn't it look like something a soldier would wear?" Dad squinted at it, then his eyes lit up. "He is a soldier. I saw guys like him driving military trucks through town. It looks exactly the same. I, Joe Miller, did something amazing today, saved a soldier." He turned excitedly toward the house. "Let's carry him inside. Honey, go kill a chicken. He's seriously hurt. We need to nourish him." I stood there stunned. I had forgotten that Dad was a total patriot. Any soldier, in his eyes, was a hero defending the country. I quickly tried to stop him. Dad, he's clearly not just some regular soldier. What if he's on a secret mission? It's not safe to keep him here. Let's send him to the village chief. He can contact the authorities in town. Their place is a lot safer than ours. Dad thought about it for a moment, then looked at me seriously and said, "Sweetheart, you really think things through better than I do." I sighed inwardly. My dad, such a kind and honest man. He even went to the trouble of layering more straw over Ethan Shaw to hide him before taking him to the village chief's house. The chief didn't ask a single question and accepted him right away. When I got back home, I was relieved that I'd finally gotten rid of that hot potato. The chief's daughter had already married off long ago. If Ethan felt the need to repay someone, he could find another way to do it. I started making plans to earn some money, buy study materials, and apply for college. In my last life, before I married Ethan, I had only completed high school. But after moving in with the Shaws, plenty of people mocked me for being uneducated. Ethan told me to attend night school and promised to help me find a job. I buried myself in my books during every free moment, desperate to prove I wasn't useless. I felt like I was making real progress, and when the thought of applying to college first entered my mind, the entire Shaw family shut it down. They said if I didn't get in, it would be a waste, and if I did get in, who would take care of Ethan's grandparents, cook, and do the laundry? To them, a girl from the countryside didn't need much education. At the time, I was completely dependent on them. Even Ethan believed that honoring one's parents came first. I had no choice but to lower my head. But once I had gained a little knowledge, I couldn't help craving more. Over the long years that followed, even though people laughed at me for pretending to be smart, the books in the Shaw household were my only source of comfort. With those memories of learning, I knew in this life I could rely on myself. Right now, it wasn't yet mandatory to have a degree to register for college entrance exams. As long as I signed up, I could take the test. It was autumn now, and I had until next summer, an entire year to prepare. Although my parents didn't fully understand why I was suddenly so driven, they supported me completely. After thinking it over, I prepared some dates and walnuts to sell at the town market. We already had the walnuts and dates. I just needed to buy some honey from the beekeepers next door at a neighborly discount. I mixed up about half a sackful at home. The first time I tried to sell them, it didn't go very well at first. But once people tasted it and found it good, everything sold out. The price was lower than I'd hoped. This was a small town, after all, and people were reluctant to spend much. Still, my mom was thrilled. After all, we only earned about 40 yuan a year. Making 6 yuan in one day was enough to feed our whole family for 2 or 3 months. After buying some groceries with Mom and heading home, I felt like the sky had suddenly collapsed. Ethan Shaw was standing right there in our courtyard. The mud brick wall around our yard wasn't high, and from a distance, I could already see the back of someone's head. When Mom saw the man standing there, she thought I was blushing because I'd spotted a stranger. Ethan turned around, and when he saw me, his eyes lit up. That scumbag, he had always been the type to get ideas just from looking. In my last life, it was because of my striking looks and curvier figure that people gossiped and said I had seduced Ethan. That's how I ended up marrying into the Shaw family. But the truth was, it was him who came after me. I ignored him and walked straight into the house with our groceries. Dad was in the middle of plucking feathers from a pigeon. Seeing me, he beamed and told me he had caught one for Officer Shaw as a tonic. He added that Ethan was already a leader at such a young age and would be leaving tomorrow. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. In my last life, he'd stayed for nearly a month before leaving. This time, it looked like it would be much quicker. The village had loudspeakers everywhere, and word spread fast. Every uncle and aunt who passed by wanted to peek inside after hearing a man had visited our house. I used the excuse that I'd made plans to have dinner at my friend Lily's house next door, gave Ethan a brief nod in passing, and left right away. That's when I learned the village chief really didn't have a daughter at home anymore. But once his married daughter from the next village heard the story, she brought her younger sister-in-law home with her. The moment that girl saw Ethan with his polished appearance and confident presence, she threw a fit demanding to marry him. Ethan didn't seem interested. Coincidentally, my dad happened to stop by. Ethan said he wanted to thank him and asked to come over to our place. So my dad brought him back home. Ha, thank him? More like using that as an excuse to have Dad cook for him. How shameless. I stayed out until almost dark before finally returning home, figuring he must have left by then. But as fate would have it, I ran into him on the road. His voice suddenly rang out from the side of the path in the darkness, and I jumped like I'd seen a ghost. I instinctively turned to run, and almost tripped over a tree branch. Ethan reacted quickly and caught me just in time. I muttered a quick thanks and tried to leave, but he called out to me asking, "Are you avoiding me?" I was, but of course, I couldn't say that. "You're overthinking it. We don't even know each other," I said. "It's just that in the countryside, gossip spreads fast. I don't want people getting the wrong idea, that's all." Ethan Shaw looked at me like he half believed what I was saying. Then he hesitated and asked how I'd found his badge. So my dad had told him everything, apparently. The snap button on the inside pocket of Ethan's jacket was actually very secure. It was hard to believe the badge just fell out. I brushed it off with, "I accidentally touched it and just pulled it out to look. What if I had saved a spy or something?" He could tell I was losing patience, but he also couldn't argue with my logic. These days, you really couldn't be too careful. There were plenty of shady types around. He said it was dark and offered to walk me home. I turned him down. I was used to walking country roads at night. Ethan left quickly this time. Before he went, though, he came by our house one last time. He told my dad thanks for bringing him here. Then he looked at me and said that if I really wanted to go to college, he could take me to the capital. There were better resources there. And even if I didn't get in, he could help me find a good job. That's when I was sure Ethan only had his eyes on me because he thought I was pretty. Otherwise, why didn't he offer to take the village chief's sister-in-law, who was clearly throwing herself at him? I gave my dad a hard look. Might as well let Ethan decide where we kept the few cents we had, too. I hadn't even committed to applying to college. I'd only mentioned it offhand to Dad. "Don't trouble yourselves," I said. "I don't even know if I'll apply." Maybe Ethan was starting to get annoyed with how many times I'd rejected him. He didn't say anything else. Sure enough, the village chief soon came around with a suggestion that Ethan should take his daughter's sister-in-law to the city and help her find a good job. It wasn't necessarily about marrying him. As long as she could get out of the mountains and marry someone decent, it was better than staying stuck here for life. These days, just having a connection could change your fate. No one could resist that kind of opportunity. I wasn't an exception in my last life either. I heard later that Ethan had mentioned taking me to the capital, and the chief's daughter took every chance she got to mock me for it. That's how it worked in the countryside. News as tiny as a sesame seed could spread to the whole village in no time. My parents were kind. When people asked, they didn't think much of it and just spilled everything. After seeing me make some money, other villagers started copying me, selling dates and walnuts too. But it wasn't like there was any real secret to it. The town was small, and once too many people started selling the same thing, it stopped being profitable. Nothing was easy to make money from these days. Our house was far from town, and other goods were hard to sell. Seeing me worry day in, day out made my parents feel just as helpless. We weren't starving, but northern villages were so isolated that starting a business required big upfront costs. And anything that didn't require much capital, well, once others copied it, it became useless fast. Even if I wanted to stick with it, it would be a headache in the long run. So I simply bought some practice books and started working through them at home. If I couldn't save money, I'd just study hard, and once I got to the city, I could earn slowly. Time passed quickly. As New Year approached, my aunt came back to visit with my cousin and uncle-in-law. Our family was simple. Dad was an only child, and when Mom was 12, she'd brought my aunt along with her and gotten on a bus that somehow led them here. My aunt had left home after middle school to find work and got married in the city. Every couple of years she'd come back to visit us. My cousin wasn't much into studying. He dropped out after high school and was working in a factory. He only found something stable last year. When he saw me studying, he found it a bit strange. He didn't really understand much, but he complimented my handwriting. When he heard from my parents that I was preparing for college, he immediately offered to help find me some materials and send them back through someone. My aunt and uncle-in-law kept praising me for having ambition. After they left, the materials my cousin promised didn't show up. But Ethan made a grand gesture. He sent a bunch of things to the village. A soldier came by, carrying a box and leaving it at our house. He said it was a thank you gift from Ethan Shaw for saving his life. Inside the box, half was filled with study materials. The rest contained 2 rolls of fabric, some snow cream for girls, and a sealed envelope. The envelope had 300 yuan inside. My parents were shocked. The letter inside said it was the new year and suggested we use the money to make clothes. The fabrics were clearly in colors women would like. I couldn't help being on guard with Ethan again. Dad asked me to write a thank you letter in return. So I did. I wrote that we were grateful for Officer Shaw's contributions to the village, and that I would share the study materials with others. As for the rest of the items, I had already taken them to town and sold them for quite a bit. That money alone would be enough to keep our whole family stable for years. I was truly grateful. I had no idea what kind of expression Ethan Shaw had on his face when he got my letter. In my last life, he'd never made such a big show of things. Sure, my dad had saved him, and this much was already more than enough to repay the favor. It felt so good not having to constantly worry about scraping together money. But what didn't feel so great was how it seemed like the entire village had started targeting my family. I didn't let it bother me too much. One day in town, I spotted an address for submitting stories to Northern Wind Literature, printed in the newspaper. I thought I'd give it a try. I submitted 2 short stories I had written in secret, and to my surprise, I actually got a reply. They accepted them and paid me 12 yuan as a manuscript fee, encouraging me to send more. It was true what they said about big cities being full of opportunity. If you had the ability and could connect with the right people, the money would follow. So I kept studying and writing at the same time, gradually shifting into longer-form stories and submitting them regularly. When my editor found out I was planning to apply to college, she mailed me a bunch of study materials, better than the ones Ethan had sent. My parents didn't know how much money I was actually earning. They just thought I was doing some casual writing here and there. In my heart, I was already planning that once I got into college, I'd study for a couple of years and then bring my parents to the capital with me. I'd make sure they had regular health checkups. If I worked hard enough, maybe I could even buy a traditional courtyard house while they were still affordable. If I could manage it, I'd buy a few properties. 10 or 15 years down the line, I'd be considered wealthy. News that I was preparing for college spread like wildfire through the village. Most people assumed I was still hung up on Ethan and wanted to go to the capital to chase after him. It was ridiculous. Everyone was just waiting to watch me fall on my face. People would pass by our house just to mutter sarcastic comments. Even my parents got dragged into it. Neighbors joked that we were rats trying to pretend to be phoenixes. A few women even said that I had a seductive look about me, and if I got lucky and got into college, I could marry some high-ranking official. Even if I didn't get in, they said, just having an education would help me land a good husband in town or the county seat. According to them, men liked girls like me. Just look at how the men in our village stared, they said. My mom nearly got into a few fights with those gossiping women. As the exam drew closer, the worry on my parents' faces grew deeper. On one hand, they feared all my hard work might come to nothing. On the other hand, they were already dreading the thought of me leaving home if I did get accepted. My parents were gentle, peace-loving people. Even if others were nasty to them, unless it crossed the line, they'd endure it in silence. Ethan Shaw was the only exception to that. After I returned from taking the exam in the county, more and more people started showing up at our doorstep every day. Some came to pry. Some came just to catch a glimpse of the girl who thought she could turn into a phoenix and fly out of the mud. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait until I'd been in college for a couple of years. The moment the results were released, I was going to take my parents with me to the capital. The large bills Ethan had given us were still untouched, and in the past 6 months, I'd earned 2 more large bills from my writing. Prices weren't outrageous back then. Renting a place only cost 60 or 70 yuan a year. If my mom bought a sewing machine, she could make clothes and earn money. My dad had a real talent for cooking. He was always tinkering with wild game he caught. If he apprenticed in a kitchen for 2 years, with 100 or 200 yuan, we could open a small restaurant. Within a few years, I might even become the kind of rich girl people dreamed of. When I told my parents all this, they thought I was talking nonsense. Mom said every housewife knew how to sew. Who would pay for homemade clothes? Dad admitted he was pretty good at cooking. In the village, people even invited him to cook for funerals and weddings. But how could his cooking compare to the professionals in big cities? I wanted to tell Mom that cities had already started selling ready-made clothes. And I wanted to tell Dad that in my last life, because of the Shaws, I'd eaten in many restaurants, and hardly any were better than the food he made. Even with our limited ingredients in the village, he could cook amazing meals. But if I said all that, they'd probably think I'd gone crazy. So instead, I hinted at things. I said I looked decent enough, and if I went that far from home on my own, I might run into bad people. That got them thinking. I kept talking to them about it over several days. Finally, the exam results came in. Across the entire county, only 13 students passed. Aside from me, there were 2 from town, and the rest were from the county seat. I ranked 2nd overall. The news spread like wildfire throughout the county, because all the others had attended high school, while I was entirely self-taught. Just like that, our family became the center of attention. My parents finally began to waver, because someone from the county had expressed interest in arranging an engagement with me. They even suggested that if it was possible, the engagement should happen before I left for college. And that was just one of the proposals. There were even more outrageous ones, offering extra dowry in exchange for a promise that I'd give them a big, healthy son. In just 2 short weeks, I'd lost track of how many marriage proposals we had to reject. With that came a shift in my reputation. Rumors resurfaced, whispers that I had already slept with that military officer. This time, the gossip spread even wider, especially among the people who had seen me before. They insisted that my figure alone was proof enough I wasn't a virgin. My parents were furious, ready to break someone's jaw with a hammer. But I knew it was useless. In this time and place where word of mouth was the only source of news, if someone started saying I was a seductress, it was only a matter of time before others believed it too. Even the village chief came to our house to ask my dad whether Ethan Shaw had rejected his daughter's sister-in-law because of me. The chief was one of the few people my dad really respected. Back when my dad was an orphan, it was the chief's grandfather who gave him his first meal. But when the chief looked at me with suspicion, his tone implying I wasn't the kind of girl who knew her place, my dad had had enough. Those words didn't hurt me, but they were tearing at my parents. In our past life, my parents had also been the subject of endless gossip and slander. Back then, when Ethan left, he gave them 500 yuan. When we got married, the dowry from the Shaw family was 1,000 yuan. Even though later they pressured me to be frugal and secretly send money home, my parents still lived decently. But people borrowed from them constantly, sometimes even climbing the wall to steal money. My parents had no choice but to swallow their losses. The village turned a blind eye to all of it. They were united in their silence. In just 1 month, what should have been a joyful time had left my parents deeply disappointed in everyone around them. I added fuel to the fire, and finally, they agreed to go to the capital with me. I got what I wanted, but I couldn't celebrate just yet. Once they settled in a bit, they'd see how good life in the city could be. In a place like that, you could report slander to the police. Neighbors didn't meddle in your private business. So to find a place to live, I left with my parents more than half a month early. On the journey, they were clearly nervous, just like before. But I was in high spirits. This time, we were setting out for a better life together. My parents were surprised to see how poised and outgoing I'd become the moment we stepped outside the village. I patted my chest and told them, this is just the beginning of our good life. We rented a traditional courtyard home not far from Tsinghua University. It had one large room split into a bedroom for my parents, a living room, and a side room with a small kitchen that became my bedroom. The rent was 67 yuan for the year. My parents were reluctant to spend that kind of money until I pulled out a big bill. They were stunned. I told them it came from the manuscript fees I'd earned myself. They didn't fully understand what that meant, only that I'd been writing non-stop at home. I explained that my publisher was located right here in the capital, and I'd be earning even more money going forward. After we got settled in, my first priority, before classes even started, was to help my parents find stable work. Dad's job would be easier to secure. I remembered a place from my past life called Shengjiangshan Restaurant, which had just opened up. It was known for upscale, reservation-only dining, with a limited number of customers per day. That meant Dad wouldn't be overworked. At first, the manager didn't even want to talk to us and was ready to kick us out. So I pulled out 50 yuan and made a bet. If my dad's cooking wasn't good, they could keep the money. But if it was good, they had to consider hiring him as head chef. Dad blushed bright red and stammered, saying I was joking too much. He'd been a farmer his whole life, just someone who lived off the land. He only cooked for large village events and tended his crops the rest of the time. That restaurant looked so expensive, he never even dared lift his head when passing by. And now suddenly, he was the center of attention. I held my dad's hand and asked, the 2 dishes I ordered, didn't they taste good? He hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. They were pretty good. He said it, but I knew he didn't really believe it. Even the cold appetizer couldn't compare to his cooking. He saw the look of certainty in my eyes. Dad finally mustered up the courage to step into the kitchen. Watching him move confidently with the knife and carry out each task with smooth precision, the manager turned to me and asked if my dad had worked as a chef before and what his signature dishes were. I said he was sort of a chef. As for specialties, anything from wild pheasant, boar, goose, pigeon, rabbit, to fish, he could cook them all deliciously. He even knew how to brew his own wine. Rice wine, clear grain liquor, plum wine, they all smelled incredible. He also made a mean vinegar. Sure, plenty of folks in the village knew how to do these things, but none of them did it as well as my dad. Not even close. The manager blinked in surprise at everything I said, clearly thinking I was exaggerating. And to be fair, when he saw Dad fumbling with the gas stove, he didn't even know how to turn it on. It didn't exactly help my case. Luckily, someone showed him how, and once he got the hang of it, he picked things up quickly. After tasting his cooking, they hired him on the spot as head chef, 45 yuan a month plus commission. And if he created new menu items, the pay would be negotiated separately. On the way home, Dad was still dazed. He never imagined he could make so much money just by cooking. Back in the village, he never realized it was even a skill worth mentioning. But the truth was, he had always been more passionate than most. He went hunting every few days just so he could experiment with new dishes. And he really did have a natural gift for it. With Dad's job settled, it was time to figure out something for Mom. She wanted to do what the other local women were doing, set up a street stall and sell food. But both Dad and I thought that wasn't a great idea. Dad said he was making enough money now and that Mom didn't need to work. But Mom wasn't the type to sit idle. Back in the countryside, she was always strong and capable. Aside from not being quite as good at cooking as Dad, she could do just about anything else with ease. I took her out around the city for 3 days, checking out different clothing shops and tailor businesses. Eventually, we bought some fabric and thread and brought them home. Then Dad and I secretly went out and bought a sewing machine. It cost 120 yuan. Mom was heartbroken when she found out the price. Dad had hesitated at first too, until I told him that a single qipao in a boutique could sell for 60 or 70 yuan. His eyes went wide. He knew how skilled Mom was with her hands. She could replicate any design just by looking at it in a magazine. In the village, even a 5 yuan piece of clothing was considered expensive. With a sewing machine, things would be much easier for her. I asked Mom to make a qipao and then had her sew a Western-style dress based on a design I picked out. On our way to Fengshan Boutique, people kept stopping us to ask where I bought the clothes. Mom couldn't stop smiling. Fengshan was a ready-to-wear boutique that also accepted custom orders. When the shop owner saw me, her eyes lit up. I had Mom take out the qipao, an elegant green dress embroidered with subtle black peonies and trimmed with pearl buttons. It was refined and graceful. I explained to the owner that Mom couldn't read much yet, but she had an excellent eye for patterns and color combinations. Mom quickly added that she was determined to learn and would study hard if given time. Honestly, with her skill alone, plenty of shops would have hired her. But I had a hunch Mom might be suited for something more. In a few years, Fengshan Boutique would become a high-end custom brand. Staying there would allow her to learn even more. The owner offered her a 1-month trial with a salary of 10 yuan. If she was kept on, she'd earn 30 yuan per month and get a 15 yuan commission for each dress sold. When we got home, Mom was so excited she skipped dinner. She grabbed the fashion design books I'd bought and studied them non-stop, flipping between them and a dictionary. Suddenly, I felt like I'd become the least important person in the house. Before the school year started, I finally met my editor, Grace, whom I'd been corresponding with all this time. When she learned that I was from a rural village and had been accepted into Jinghua University, she was stunned. And when she found out I had brought my parents with me, she looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. The next day, she came by our house to discuss publishing a short story collection. When she saw the dress my mom was working on, she couldn't stop praising it. She hesitated, then asked if Mom could make one for her too, and said she'd pay, even offered to put down a 60 yuan deposit up front. Mom was so startled that she quickly said she couldn't take money from a friend of mine. After a long back and forth, she finally relented, barely, and agreed to make it, but only if Grace didn't insist on paying. I had to step in and tell Grace to just let it go, or Mom might not welcome her back. That finally got Grace to put the money away. I reassured her. Don't worry, my mom's sewing at Fengshan now. You'll have your dress soon. If she likes it, maybe she could help spread the word about my mom's work, I said. That's when Grace's eyes finally lit up. She ended up staying at our house until after 9 p.m. Since around 7, Dad had someone bring dinner home for me and Mom. Seeing that, I invited her to stay and try some of Dad's cooking. Even though the food wasn't piping hot, Grace ate like she hadn't had a proper meal in years. Thankfully, I'd asked Mom to make some extra dumplings ahead of time, otherwise we would have had to fight her for the food. I also brought out some plum wine Dad had brewed. It was light and wouldn't make you drunk. After a few glasses and a full stomach, Grace started rambling happily, swearing she'd never eaten anything so good in her life. Mom laughed non-stop, completely charmed. Grace was a college graduate herself, came from a good family, had a steady job, and was quite attractive too. And when Mom learned that Grace was the editor who had accepted my manuscripts and helped me earn money, she absolutely adored her. We didn't have a phone at home, so Grace called her older brother to come pick her up. When I saw her brother, I froze. I remembered him clearly from my previous life. It had been at someone's wedding that the Shaw family attended. Most of the guests were military, but her brother had been the only businessman there. I'd seen him more than once. In the compound, people always looked down on businessmen, yet that day, everyone of his generation raised their glasses to toast him. He barely sipped his drinks, and no one seemed to mind. Even Ethan Shaw greeted him with respect. They clinked glasses and each drank half. I'd been sitting at the women's table directly across from him and overheard a lot. I remembered his last name was Chu. They said the Chu family had been in politics for generations, but had 2 black sheep. One of them was this very Chu. He'd refused to use any family connections and absolutely refused to enter politics. He became a businessman instead. In just a few years, he'd built an empire worth hundreds of millions and was constantly getting scolded by his elders. There was even a story that he once argued with his father, yelling that he didn't care if they executed capitalists, he was going to be one anyway. Later, I heard he donated 2/3 of his fortune when the country was in trouble. He was practically hailed a hero. People might look down on businessmen, but when faced with someone who could crush them with money and had powerful roots to boot, they all fell silent. For a moment, I wondered if I was seeing things. With both my parents working now, they looked more energized every day. To my surprise, they had even started studying at home. Dad said his customers were all cultured people. He couldn't afford to embarrass himself. Mom said to make great clothes, she had to understand fashion, and that meant reading more books. Somehow, I had become the most idle person in the house. On the first day of school, as I walked through the gates of Tsinghua University, the same campus where I'd once delivered clothes to Ethan's sister in my past life, I felt something different. This time, it was truly my college life. This was what real living felt like. I had just received approval from my professor to live off campus, and while I was wandering around afterward, I ran into Ethan Shaw and his sister, Erin Shaw. I wanted to pretend I didn't know them and walk away, but Ethan had already quickened his pace and stopped right in front of me. "Lena, why didn't you contact me when you came to the capital?" That question caught me off guard. It meant he already knew I was here. He probably even knew my parents had come with me. He must have been asking around constantly. How nosy could one person be? "I didn't want to bother you. Thanks again for the materials and money you sent earlier. It really helped my family. Could you give me your address?" Ethan looked a little embarrassed. "Of course. Are you planning to visit me?" I smiled politely. "If there's a chance, I'd certainly come by to thank you properly." He smiled at that, then added, "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask, and if your parents are looking for work, I can help with that too." That's when Erin, who had been eyeing me suspiciously the whole time, finally jumped in. "So this is the rural girl you've been sponsoring?" In our past life, Erin always disapproved of me. She thought I wasn't worthy of their family and constantly made passive-aggressive remarks whenever she had the chance. Ethan quickly turned to me, looking a bit flustered. "Don't take it the wrong way." Of course, I knew Ethan hadn't said anything rude. This was just Erin being her usual self, trying to get under my skin. I smiled. "Yes, I'm very grateful to Mr. Shaw for his generosity. But my parents don't need help finding work, they're already employed." I handed over a notebook. "Would you mind writing down the address?" Erin's tone turned sharp and sarcastic. "You're already asking for an address? Sounds like trouble's coming." Ethan handed me the pen and, face darkening, told Erin firmly, "That's enough. Keep your mouth shut." Ethan turned away and muttered that his sister was still young, spoiled, and used to getting her way. I shook my head and said it was fine, then excused myself, saying I had something to take care of. As I walked off, I could still hear them behind me. Erin was fussing, saying she'd go home and tell their parents that Ethan was losing his mind over some girl from the countryside. She even claimed I dressed like a seductress and clearly knew how to tempt men. Ethan kept trying to shut her up. There was so much going on, I had forgotten. Erin had just started college this year too. I needed to hurry and pay back the money Ethan had given me. If I didn't, who knew what kind of trouble Erin would stir up next? Campus life was wonderful. The coursework felt manageable to me. And being surrounded by so many young people made me feel lighter, happier. At first, some of my classmates had prejudices. They saw how I looked and then heard I came from a village and they didn't know what to make of me. When they found out I'd brought my parents with to the city, some pitied me. But when they saw how well I dressed, looking like a city girl through and through, they started to feel uneasy again. But those feelings slowly faded as we spent more time together. I even became like a big sister figure to some of them. My royalties weren't coming in yet. I'd have to wait until next month. Right now, I only had a little over 400 yuan. I was planning to gather at least 600 to pay Ethan back, more, if possible. Making an extra 10 or 20 wasn't hard, but a few hundred was a different story. When Grace came to see me, I asked if she knew any quick ways to make money. She asked me why I was in such a hurry. I was a student now, and my parents both had jobs. What could be so urgent that I needed that much money? I explained the situation with Ethan. Grace frowned. "That Shaw family has issues. Your dad saved his life. Even if it was a few thousand, he still owed it. And now he's acting like giving you a bit of money was some kind of charity?" I tried to calm her down. It was his sister who said those things. She probably thinks that since I'm from the countryside, I must be trying to get close to her brother for personal gain. It's understandable. Grace rolled her eyes. Understandable? You're totally normal and so talented. Your parents are amazing too. And you're saying you're not good enough for some army guy? Please. You're way out of his league. Then she gestured toward my figure, then my face. Honestly, I don't even get why people think you're not good enough. I mean, just look at you. I explained. The Shaws are from the old government compound families. They care a lot about background and pedigree. It's just how it is. But the more I talked, the more fired up Grace got. Eventually, she remembered that Ethan had only given me 300 yuan and some supplies, nothing especially valuable. Why are you even worried? It's not like you owe him a fortune. I realized then that I probably hadn't explained it clearly. I want to pay him back 300, maybe even 500 to 1,000, just to be safe. Then I can use the rest to get other things done. Grace slapped her thigh. 1,000? That's nothing. I'll lend you 2,000. That's when I knew I'd guessed right. Grace was even more of a rich girl than I had thought. My mouth twitched. I want to repay him, but I also want to earn it myself. It's not an emergency. Grace studied my face, then suddenly leaned closer with a mysterious look. Okay, I'll keep an eye out for opportunities for you. I told her not to stress about it. I was just throwing ideas around, really. It was mostly that Aaron Shaw felt like a ticking time bomb waiting to blow up in my face. Later, Grace waited for me by the school gate and pulled me into a car. When I saw who was sitting in the front seat, my brain buzzed. Just as I'd suspected, it was him. One sibling had taken the father's surname, the other the mother's. In any case, Grace had definitely landed herself a powerful ally. A very powerful one. Grace's brother was named Daniel Chu, and with a name like that, you'd never think they were from the same family. Grace explained that he was their great-grandfather's grandson from another branch of the family and didn't get to use the main surname. Daniel Chu glanced at me in the rearview mirror. You seem pretty cheerful. I tried to hide my smile but failed, waving my hand. No, not really. You look like you just hit the jackpot, he said. Well, I grinned. Being around you guys does give off that struck-it-rich kind of vibe. He didn't quite get what I meant, but found it amusing anyway. Grace teased me, saying I never took writing seriously anymore and was always trying to find ways to make money. Then Daniel Chu offered me a way to earn some, teaching at the local orphanage. 2 classes every Sunday, 200 yuan per class. I was actually a little hesitant. It felt wrong to accept money for something like that. It made me feel greedy, like I was profiting off of kindness. I talked things over with Daniel Chu. I told him I'd be happy to teach the orphanage classes, but I didn't want to be paid. I also said I was open to trying another job if one came up. Ethan responded bluntly, I've got money. If you've got time, just come hang out and help me unwind. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. But it wasn't until he picked me up to go to the orphanage that I realized he really did mean for me to just keep him company. Something about the whole thing felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. When I saw him parked at the entrance of the alley, I froze. He was sitting in the front seat like a boss, treating me like his chauffeur. I forced a smile and got in. The entire drive was awkward beyond belief. My mind was racing the whole time, and I eventually landed on one conclusion. Daniel Chu might have feelings for me. Not that I was being full of myself. Back in my past life, people in the compound had always been watching Ethan Shaw, wondering when he'd dump me and marry someone else. As for Daniel Chu, I'd never heard anything about him getting married in that life. But a man like him could snap his fingers and have women throwing themselves at him. If he snapped his fingers for me... No, I reminded myself, this life was about independence. I wasn't going to depend on anyone. I caught myself stealing glances at his profile and immediately felt annoyed at myself. I shouldn't have told Grace anything. From the moment we left the orphanage, things felt weird between us. All afternoon, I'd had a blast playing with the kids, but any time I looked at Daniel Chu, I felt off. Maybe I was just hyper-aware of him. Are you tired? He asked as we left. Want to grab something to eat? I quickly shook my head. No, thanks, my dad already made dinner for me. The silence in the car after that was downright eerie. When we were almost home, he pulled over on the side of the road. I thought maybe he'd gotten the address wrong. There were still 2 streets left before my place. "What are you thinking about?" I lowered the hand I'd raised to point the way. I wasn't sure why, but my heart started beating faster. "Nothing, it's just, my house is still 2 streets down." Daniel Chu turned to look at me, staring directly into my eyes. He'd been to my place 3 times already. He definitely knew where it was. A weird pressure started building in my chest, and for some reason, I felt like crying. Just a few days ago, everything was normal. What was this sudden shift in attitude? "Yeah?" His voice was calm, but I was suddenly nervous as hell. "Get a grip," I scolded myself. Between this life and the last, I was practically 60 years old. Why was I freaking out over some guy barely older than me? I tried to gather my thoughts, but when I finally spoke, my words came out all jumbled. I feel like maybe you might have certain intentions toward me, but I'm just a student. I don't think about things like that." Daniel Chu let out a low chuckle, clearly amused. "What kind of intentions? Like, keeping a mistress or something?" My voice was barely above a whisper, but I forced myself to say it. "If that's what this is, please don't waste your time. I'm not interested. I'd never agree to something like that." I could feel him shift in his seat. He'd been lounging lazily before, but now he was sitting up straight. The tension in the car was unbearable. "I'll get out here," I blurted. "Thanks for the ride." I reached for my seatbelt, but his voice cut through the silence, cold as ice. "Sit down. I'll take you home." He didn't say another word the rest of the drive. When we finally pulled up at the alley, I thanked him again. He still didn't respond. I got out and walked toward the gate. His car didn't move until he saw me step inside. Only then did he drive off. That night, I had a dream of Daniel Chu, of all people. In it, he made me kneel at his feet and accused me of being ungrateful. I woke up thinking it was the most ridiculous thing ever. The next day, Grace came by to drop off some money and couldn't stop grumbling about her brother. She said he'd come home the night before in a foul mood and didn't talk to anyone. At lunch, he sat there stone-faced, and when their dad asked him a question, he snapped back with a one-word answer. His dad got so mad, he took a whip to him. I was horrified. "He hit him?" Grace just sighed. "Yeah, my dad's intense, but honestly, my brother kind of asks for it sometimes. He's been like that his whole life. Never bows to anyone. Always picks fights." She explained that their dad already had a problem with the 2 of them, one becoming a businessman and the other going into publishing. Luckily, she was a girl, so it wasn't as bad for her. But Daniel Chu? He was a constant source of irritation. "When he's in a good mood, he and Dad can talk like normal," she said. "But when he's not, he ignores everyone." When both of them were in a bad mood, it was guaranteed Daniel Chu would get punished. The worst part was that even after being whipped, he still had the audacity to say, "If you've got the guts, kill me." Grace told me their mom cried from sheer frustration. That was finally when things calmed down. I felt uneasy hearing all of it. The beating sounded way too harsh. "Wait. Did you just say the magazine is yours?" I asked. Grace blinked. "Didn't I mention that?" "No," I said, taking a sharp breath. That explained everything, why she was so free, so confident. She was beautiful, educated, ambitious, and independent. I could never compare, not even in this life, but having a friend like her truly felt like a stroke of luck. Still, taking that 400 yuan paycheck now felt a bit awkward. But Grace just waved it off, saying she was only delivering it, and if I had any issues, I could talk to her brother. I thought about it for a moment and let it go. It was too awkward anyway. Maybe Daniel Chu had been in a bad mood because of me, even if just a little. I had hit a nerve by calling him out. He hadn't said anything. But still, I could imagine the embarrassment. I figured it'd be best not to see him again. I'd find another way to make money. I put the money in an envelope and quietly handed it to Ethan Shaw at school. Once again, I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. I didn't want to owe him anything, not even a favor, just in case. Life finally settled into a rare moment of peace. Aside from my studies, I threw myself into writing my new novel. There were little ripples here and there in my daily life. One day, on the way to class with my classmates, I ran into Erin Shaw. She was walking arm in arm with another girl, loudly making comments about shameless village girls who tried to seduce men and become phoenixes by clinging to some branch they didn't belong to. It was so pointed that even my classmates picked up on it. As I passed by, I looked at the flowers along the path and said, "Moron," just loud enough. Erin stormed up and grabbed my sleeve, but I didn't bother being polite. I shook her off and walked away, leaving her shouting insults at my back like a madwoman. I really didn't want anything to do with that family, but the gossip was inevitable. Soon, rumors spread around campus that I had gotten into college by sleeping my way in. Some students even came to our class just to see what I looked like. Afterward, they were even more convinced. "She looks just like a seductress," they said. "And she's from the countryside. There's no way she scored high enough to get in." Some guys started slipping obscene love notes into my desk. Word spread that I already had 2 or 3 boyfriends. All I wanted was to slap them in the face with my achievements. Final exams were approaching. I figured I'd wait for the results. Real grades would be the best way to shut down those rumors. Meanwhile, Mom was apparently swamped working on an urgent order for a wealthy client and had been coming home late every night. Dad told me to just eat at the restaurant in the evenings. Ever since I'd helped name a few dishes and come up with slogans while taste testing new menu items, the manager at Shengjiangshan lit up every time he saw me. And when he heard other restaurants were trying to poach my dad, he started treating us even better. Now, when I dropped by, the staff treated me like family. Sometimes, if they were short-staffed, the head waitress would ask me to help out. I didn't mind. It felt natural by now. But my cursed connection with the Shaw family wasn't done haunting me. One night, while heading there for dinner, I ran into all of them: Ethan, Erin, their parents, and Yvonne Yao. In my past life, the Shaws had once tried to match Ethan with Yvonne. She liked to make my married life a nightmare. Ethan always told me to tolerate her, swore he'd never divorce me. Looking back, I should have just divorced him. Erin spotted me right away and must have told their parents something, probably assuming I was a waitress. Mrs. Shaw looked at me like I was beneath her, lifting her chin with that haughty air of superiority. I glanced at them, baffled. What's wrong with these people? The main dining area of Shengjiangshan wasn't large. The space was divided by bamboo partitions. Ethan and Yvonne were seated across from the rest, while Mr. and Mrs. That Shaw and Erin were positioned so they could see the center of the dining room. When Erin pointed at me and called over a server, I rolled my eyes and headed straight into the kitchen. I didn't expect her to throw a fit right there. I heard the noise and stepped out just as Erin slammed her chopsticks down and started scolding a waitress. If she's not a waitress, what is she? I insist she serves us today. I walked over and gently pulled the blushing waitress aside. When Ethan saw me, even he looked awkward and muttered an apology. Mrs. Shaw gave him a cold look, then glared at the waitress and snapped. "Didn't Manager Zhang say this place was high-end? When you run into rude customers like this, throw them out immediately." At first, Erin looked smug when she saw me, clearly thinking she'd scored a victory. But as soon as she heard what I said, her face tensed right up. Mr. Shaw, so used to his lofty status, clearly felt embarrassed. The look he gave me was full of threat. He immediately demanded to see the restaurant manager, while Erin started shouting that I should be kicked out. When a staff member clarified that I wasn't an employee but was here to see my dad, she shouted louder, insisting that my dad should be kicked out too. "Wow, the great Colonel Shaw really knows how to throw his weight around," I said. "Dragging your whole family around to bully civilians?" As Erin and Mrs. Shaw's insults grew nastier and nastier, I decided I'd had enough. If they wanted a scene, I'd give them one. Hit the root first, cut the head off the snake. The surrounding diners, who had been whispering and gossiping, all went silent the moment I said, "There's a military officer here." Suddenly, all eyes were on us. Mr. Shaw froze for a second, then looked at me with something new in his eyes. "Young lady, you'd do well to watch your words," he said coolly. "Throwing around accusations like that, do you really think you can handle the consequences?" I gave a cold laugh. "Colonel Shaw, is that a threat? Because I have a clear conscience, and I'm not afraid of ghosts knocking at my door." Erin looked like she wanted to rip me apart, especially when I said I would call the police. "You hick. she spat. Do you really think you can stir up trouble in the capital? Just because my brother gave you a little help? You think he's going to marry you? You stink of poverty. Someone like you doesn't deserve anything. And this family? It's not even my brother's call. Shut up. For the first time, Ethan Shaw finally spoke, his voice sharp. That's enough. I'm sorry, Lena. My sister's spoiled. Please don't take it to heart. I had heard that line too many times in my past life. I had endured more humiliation than I could count. My gaze toward Ethan turned ice cold. If your sister can't understand basic human decency, then let me spell it out while the whole Shaw family's here. I turned toward the crowd. Erin has been spreading rumors about me at school, telling people I only got into college because of Ethan, that I seduced classmates and seduced her brother. That slander has damaged my reputation. Once exams are over, I will file a report with the police. Let them decide what the punishment is for malicious defamation. My college entrance scores were earned fair and square. I have no idea what favors I supposedly used from the Shaw family. And instead of throwing your weight around here, Colonel, maybe focus on how you're going to get your daughter out of legal trouble. The Shaw family looked stunned that I would bring up repaying them so publicly. Their expressions darkened with fury. Mrs. Shaw glared at me and said coldly, "How noble of you to talk about independence. Your whole family didn't even make 50 yuan a year in that village. Without my son's help, how would you have ever gotten out? What about the study materials? Do you think you could have bought those back home? My son pulled your family out of the mountains, and now you act like paying him back means you owe nothing? Have some shame." Her words were sharp, but I, Lena Zhou, had my pride too. Before I could speak, Grace stepped out from where she'd been standing quietly against the wall, her voice calm but clear. "Mrs. Shaw, that's quite the story." She gave the room a long look. "I'm Grace Chu. I've been Lena's publisher for the past 4 years. She's been earning 70 to 80 yuan per month in royalties since long before she moved to the city. Are you saying a published writer can't afford study materials?" I jolted a bit at her sudden appearance. I hadn't seen her there at all. I glanced through the bamboo divider and met her piercing eyes, which sent a chill through my chest. I looked away in a fluster. Damn it, I thought. Why am I nervous? The Shaws recognized Grace immediately. Their expressions shifted, less aggressive now, tinged with forced politeness. But Erin couldn't help herself. She scoffed, latching on to what Grace had said about me being a writer. What a joke. A country girl, an author? Even if you're a Miss Chu, you should check the trash before standing up for it. Grace gave me a reassuring look before turning a cold gaze on Erin. Miss Zhou is someone I personally signed 4 years ago. Her exclusive interview is coming out soon. Perhaps you'll see it then. As for those so-called materials, when I heard she was studying for college, I sent her more than a few myself. And now the Shaw family's acting like a few hundred yuan and some notebooks saved the Zhou family from ruin? That's just laughable. The Shaw family looked completely stunned, but also helpless. Erin kept flapping her mouth, insisting we were lying. The other diners, meanwhile, had already gotten their fill of the drama. All eyes were on them now. Not us. Every word out of Grace's mouth dripped with contempt and dismissal toward the Shaw family. Mr. and Mrs. Shaw, who had probably never been challenged so publicly in their lives, sat stiff-faced, clearly embarrassed, yet unable to respond. If I had known my daughter would be bullied like this, just for saving someone, my dad said as he emerged from the kitchen, I would have left him to die on that mountain, with no one the wiser. He'd been working in the back, but the gossip must have reached him. Ethan Shaw's mouth opened, his face filled with shame and frustration. I'm sorry, Mr. Zhou, but my dad met his gaze, not the least bit intimidated. I hear you're a colonel, he said, calm but firm. Well, our family made it out of the countryside by our daughter's own hard work and abilities. It had nothing to do with your Shaw family. If you think you can just open your mouth and smear us, bully us, then I swear on my life, I'll go all the way to the central government and find someone who can stand up for ordinary people like us. I was shocked to see how straight my father was standing. Then I caught a glimpse of his trembling hand and felt a bittersweet kind of pride. The Shaws must have realized they weren't going to come out of this looking good. If they pushed further, It might create real trouble. Mr. Shaw ordered Erin to apologize. She dragged her feet for a long time, but finally, she looked at me like she wanted to kill me and muttered, "Sorry." "Save it for the police," I said coolly. "I fully intend to pursue legal action for the defamation at school." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving the whole Shaw family stewing in their own frustration. Yvonne Yao, who had been sitting in the corner quietly, watched me with the same scornful expression as Erin. Outside, Grace caught up with me. "Wait up," she said. A moment later, she returned with her bag, walking alongside Daniel Chu. "I just remembered something," Grace said suddenly, then took off in a hurry, leaving me alone with Daniel Chu. He looked at me. "Come on, I'll take you home." I suddenly remembered I'd come here to eat. Making an excuse, I said I needed to go back and get my food. "It's not far, I'll walk." Ethan grabbed my wrist. "I need to talk to you. Let's go somewhere else to eat." My heart skipped. What could he possibly want to talk about? I had already asked Grace to pass my messages to him. I'd also told her I'd handle the orphanage thing myself when I had time. There was no need for more favors. I was still disoriented when we sat down at the hot pot place. Somehow, I'd said yes without thinking. When Ethan finally got to the point and said he wanted to pursue me, my brain shut down. He explained it seriously. He wasn't playing around. He was talking about a real relationship with marriage as the end goal. While he said all this, I accidentally shoved a raw piece of peppercorn-covered meat into my mouth. I immediately started choking and coughing uncontrollably. Ethan reached over, placing a hand gently under my chin to help, and I swear my face was hot enough to fry an egg. Panicking, I grabbed his hand and spit the meat into it. To his credit, Ethan didn't even flinch. He just handed me a glass of water. I was shaken. Was this really the same neat freak Grace always complained about? Did he really like me? After hesitating for a while, I finally told him we weren't a good match. But I had no idea that those words would come back to haunt me. From that day forward, Daniel Chu launched a full-scale courtship campaign. He brought his friends around to meet me, invited his family to dine at Shengjiangshan, had his mother custom order clothes, and kept sending gifts to my home. Grace became a regular visitor, and even she started saying, "Yup, he's definitely into you." She even told me how shocking it was when Ethan, the guy who avoided hassle like the plague, had taken the initiative to find study materials and mail them to me. "You two were probably fated," she joked, and honestly, I couldn't resist. A handsome man who treated me kindly and only had eyes for me? Eventually, I said yes. When we officially got together, Ethan told me about all the times he'd seen me. "The first time, it was dark," he said. "I just thought you had a great figure. The second time, I thought you were pretty. The third time, I thought you were adorable and kind of infuriating. The fourth time, in the restaurant, I knew you were mine." I thought that was absurd, but when I looked up and saw the fiery determination in his eyes, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. He had a way of making me lose focus. Then came Ethan Shaw. I don't know how he found my house, but when I saw him standing at the gate, he looked stunned all over again. "Why do I feel like you really hate me?" he asked. "Maybe because you're a little too full of yourself," I said dryly. He apologized again on behalf of his sister, said that from the first time he saw me, he felt something different. But Daniel Chu walked out just then and interrupted him, taking my hand and pulling me away. Ethan Shaw never stopped watching as we walked off together. Erin Shaw ended up getting arrested after I reported her to the police. At first, she flat out refused to apologize. It wasn't until she heard that her father had decided not to step in and that she might actually face jail time that she finally broke down, crying and dragging her feet, and issued a public apology over the school's broadcast using her real name. After that, whenever I bumped into her on campus, she'd still glare at me but quickly walk away. But there was one time she just couldn't help herself. She stormed over and muttered, "Daniel Chu's going to dump you eventually. There's no way you two are getting married." Then she stomped off, clearly feeling she'd said something satisfying. I wonder what her face looked like when she found out we got married right after graduation. Honestly, I owed a lot of peace in my life to Daniel Chu. If it hadn't been for him, the Shaw family would have kept making trouble for me behind the scenes. He spared me a whole lot of hassle. Grace once told me that Aaron probably always had it out for me because Ethan Shaw had told their family he wanted to marry me. That could have been why the whole Shaw clan disliked me so much. But Grace had only heard that from someone else. She wasn't sure of the details. Still, I knew the Shaw family was always twisting things to suit themselves. On our wedding day, Ethan Shaw actually showed up again. He told me once more that he still believed I was the love of his life. Daniel Chu nearly had him thrown into the river on the spot. Sometimes my past life felt like a blurry dream, while the happiness in this life felt almost too real to believe. That is, except for the moments when Daniel Chu pinned me down in bed, insisting on asking over and over, "So you still think we're not a good match?" Every single time, I wanted to die from embarrassment, and sometimes I really did consider just playing dead. In this life, I got to rewrite everything. I held my parents' hands as we walked through streets we never imagined we'd live on, watching them smile in ways I'd never seen in our old village. My mother's dresses were now worn by women with wealth and taste, her name stitched quietly into each tag. My father's food was the talk of the city, and people lined up weeks in advance just to taste what he made with his own hands. And me? I published my first novel before graduation. I stood in bookstores and saw my name on the cover, watched strangers flip through my stories like they mattered, because they did. I married a man who didn't just love me, but respected me. Daniel Chu never asked me to change, never expected me to be smaller than who I was. He stood beside me when people doubted me, defended me when they insulted me, and believed in me long before I ever knew how to believe in myself. Sometimes I still dreamed of the old life, the one where I was invisible, where my voice didn't matter, where love was conditional and always came with silence. But I always woke up next to Ethan, sunlight slipping across our sheets, and reminded myself, I chose differently this time. I chose to speak up. I chose to walk away. I chose myself. And because of that, I chose a future that belonged fully to me. No more borrowed names, no more borrowed strength. This time, I lived loudly, I loved freely, and I never ever looked back.